and welcome back. Today's video is a true crime video and it is about unsolved cold cases. Hopefully you guys haven't heard of them. I've tried to find cases that not many people have heard of. I think there might be one, which is number one, funny enough, that is the most popular, but let me know. Comment down below if there's any cold cases that you want me to cover. There will be a part 2, which is solved cold cases. So I'm working through you guys' suggestions and I'm so excited to get through them all because I have found some very interesting cases. So let me know what you guys think. Thumbs up if you like it and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss part 2. But yes, stay tuned for more, guys. Thanks. The unsolved death of Ricky McCormick. The decomposed body of Ricky McCormick was discovered face down in West Alton, Missouri, near Route 367, on June 30th, 1999. A driver was driving near this route when she spotted the body. He was identified by his fingerprints, due to an earlier arrest and incarceration. Authorities were baffled by the murder, as his body was discovered 15 miles away from his home, in a very isolated area. He had no car at the time of his death, and buses did not pass the area. Nobody understood how he would have gotten there. The only explanation was that he was transported there by a third party. I should also probably add that he was reported missing for only 72 hours, but his body suggested that he died much earlier due to how decomposed his body was. An autopsy at the time of the discovery failed to find a cause of death, declaring it as undetermined. The police, however, suspected it was a homicide, and his time of death was concluded as 27th of June. The investigation uncovered that his last known whereabouts was a visit to the Malco gas station where he worked on the 27th of June. He also spoke to his girlfriend, Sandra, on the phone on the 26th of June. On the 25th of June, he visited the St. Louis Forest Park Hospital. The most baffling thing about Ricky's death was the 2 handwritten notes that were discovered in his pockets. Now, this is even stranger because apparently Ricky was practically illiterate and only really knew how to spell his name. Allegedly, the notes are coded with a cipher, and they have been attempted to be deciphered by the best of the best, including the Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, the CRRU, and the American Cryptogram Association. In 2011, these notes were made public in a way to try and get the public to help decipher them. However, to this day, Ricky McCormick's cipher remains unsolved. His family spoke out in 2012 to say that they did not believe that Ricky wrote the notes, as they thought he did not have enough capacity to craft a code. His father and aunt believed that he was not a competent writer and may have been dyslexic. And then his friends say that he was known to write down a lot of nonsense. There are a lot of theories surrounding this case. Ricky had a sketchy past. In the early 1990s, he pled guilty to statutory rape for fathering 2 children with a 14-year-old girl. Furthermore, Ricky's girlfriend told the police that Ricky had made a couple of trips to Orlando, Florida, to pick up drugs for Baja, the owner of the gas station that Ricky worked at. This supports the theory that Ricky was participating in illegal activity at the time of his death. Additionally, Gregor Knox, a high-level drug dealer who was operating in Ricky's neighborhood, was a suspect in several other homicides. In fact, a confidential informant also told the police that Knox was responsible for the murder of a black man who worked at the gas station on Chateau Avenue, whose body was dumped near West Alton. It was reported by both his girlfriend and his aunt that Ricky seemed afraid after he last returned from Orlando. Also, the police were all too familiar with the area. It was known to be a criminal dumping ground for bodies. The first thing I want to point out is when I was researching this case, there's a lot of similarities with Mr.Cruel and the Golden State Killer. Mr.Cruel is the press-given name of a serial pedophile rapist and a suspected murderer. He was active in the late 1980s and the early 1990s in the suburbs of Melbourne, Australia. Police describe him as a highly intelligent and meticulous planner who conducted surveillance of his intended victims and made sure not to leave any forensic traces at the crime scene. He also concealed his identity by covering his face. His MO consisted of breaking into the victim's home, incapacitating them, and threatening their life with a hunting knife or a handgun. He would also take steps to confuse and divert the future investigations of his crimes. Cruel's first attack was carried out on the 22nd of August 1987 in Lower Plenty. Utilizing his signature MO, he broke into a family's home at 4 a.m., cut the phone lines, and tied the parents and their son up, before attacking their daughter for 2 hours. His second attack was carried out on 27th of December 1988 in Ringwood in a similar fashion. This time, he also demanded money from the parents and kidnapped their daughter. The daughter was released 18 hours later on the grounds of a high school. Sharon was blindfolded throughout the entire ordeal, so she wasn't able to give a physical description of the attacker, but she described him as soft-spoken, that actually seemed to somewhat care about his victims, and rather gentle. Shortly before she was let go, the suspect had given the 10-year-old a thorough cleaning, not only washing off any possible forensic evidence he had left behind, but clipping her fingernails and toenails, brushing and flossing her teeth, and more. The abductor either kept or discarded her clothes. He then dressed her in an assortment of garbage bags before dumping her off on the grounds of Baywater High School. Cruel's last confirmed attack was carried out on July 3rd, 1990, in Canterbury. Much like the previous attack, this time, the kidnapped victim was molested in another house for 50 hours before being released at a power substation. Nicola could hear planes taking off and landing, which made detectives believe he must have lived either near or on a flight path. Cruel is also suspected in the 1991 murder of a teenage girl, Carmen Chan, who went to the same school as one of the previous victims. She was kidnapped by Mr. Cruel. The armed assailant was armed with a knife, and her body was found a year later. Some detectives, however, have doubts whether the murder case can be linked to other cases. As many as 27,000 suspects have been interviewed by the police, and a case file was prepared with the assistance of the FBI, which contained information on 7 possible suspects. It is believed that Mr. Cruel videotaped or took photos of the attacks. Detectives believe that if he was still alive, he would still have those photos, or collect or swap child pornography. The kidnapped girls both described being shackled to a bed with a rough neck brace. Emilie Morrison was a 35-year-old woman who was found deceased under suspicious circumstances on November 4th, 2014. She died while in the midst of a court battle against a high school cross-country coach who had sexually abused her while she was growing up. The coach's name was Jim Wilder. Wilder had been sexually abusing Emilie since she was 15 years old, after she began competing on the cross-country team. Their relationship was an open secret amongst the students and even the parents in the community. According to a classmate of Emilie's, Wilder was a highly regarded person at the school and often received recognition for his performance in coaching. The same classmate said that nobody thought anything was wrong with Emilie's relationship with him, as Wilder always did this, and nobody ever said anything about it before. In 1996, the principal at the high school was tipped off about the inappropriate relationship, but both Emilie and Wilder denied having anything other than a coach-athlete relationship. After the investigation, Emilie's mother said that she started to notice a change in her daughter. The once happy-go-lucky girl began to suffer from low self-esteem and depression that only seemed to get worse throughout the remainder of her high school years. Things continued to decline for Emilie as she entered college as well, as she began to develop bulimia and increasingly worse depression. Emilie would later trace her eating issues back to Wilder's harsh criticism of her body in high school. By 2007, Emilie's life seemed to be going in a positive direction. At this point, she was married with 2 children. According to her family, Emilie was stable for the first time in a very long time. This is why she decided to stay quiet the following year when it was revealed that Wilder had yet another inappropriate relationship with a student. In December 2008, Wilder was arrested based on a report that he had sexual contact with a current female student. Emilie knew the allegations were likely true, but she did not want to get involved and have to relive her own painful memories all over again. Unfortunately, those charges against Wilder were eventually dropped. By February 2009, St. Louis Prosecution Office announced it had no credible evidence that any sexual contact had taken place between Wilder and the anonymous minor. He was able to return to his job at the high school. In the following years, Emilie's depression returned. She began struggling with alcoholism and eventually divorced her husband in 2012. He was granted full custody of their 2 children. During this time, Emilie finally confided in her parents about her relationship with Wilder. It sickened Emilie that Wilder was still able to coach young children, especially since Emilie's friend had a daughter who was playing on the soccer team that Wilder trained. In the summer 2013, with encouragement from her parents, friends, and therapist, Emilie decided to go to the police. As a part of the investigation, police asked Emilie to have a conversation with Wilder while secretly wearing a microphone to see if he would confess to any of their inappropriate relationship. Emilie agreed and approached Wilder by telling him that her new therapist had encouraged her to revisit the past. During their conversation, Wilder admitted to having a relationship with Emilie whilst she was a minor. However, he did not believe he did anything wrong. At one point, Wilder is heard saying, "In 90% of the world, 15's legal. So if I go over and boff a 15-year-old in Spain, I can do it all day in the streets, whatever, and nothing would happen." He also stated that he felt Emilie was the persuasive one in the relationship, and he felt that their relationship was a choice that they both made together. Despite the fact Wilder still obviously did not understand that his actions were wrong, he still confessed to breaking the law by engaging in a sexual relationship with a minor, and Emilie caught his confession on tape. She turned the tape over to investigators, and Wilder was subsequently arrested and charged with 6 counts. Statutory sodomy. By November 2014, the case was still pending, and Wilder was out on bail. Emilie was ready to put the whole ordeal behind her, but unfortunately, she never got the chance. On November 4th, Emilie was found dead, face down, on her bedroom floor, with a large trash can pulled over her head. Sadly, her father removed the trash can and started cleaning up her house before people saw. He didn't want people to think that she was a slob. She died from asphyxiation from the plastic bag lining from the trash can, but her manner of death was left undetermined by the county medical examiner. Emilie's death is being called suspicious by investigators, as one of her apartment doors was unlocked at the time, and it is unclear how she got into the position that she was found in. Her parents were initially worried that she had been drinking at the time of her death. It was determined that she did have some sort of alcohol in her system, but it wouldn't be enough to put her in this position or knock her unconscious. Even stranger, her phone, which everybody knew the password to, was changed. Nobody could get into it for a year. When they finally got into it, they discovered the account had been messed with. Most records had been cleared since October. Emilie died in November. After Emilie's death, the charges against Wilder were dropped. The prosecutor ultimately stated that they needed Emilie's testimony in order to win the case, and they could no longer obtain this since she passed away. Wilder remains free today. Well, that is the end of today's video. Let me know how I did in the comments, and make sure you subscribe for more.